This is Alex from VoiceCast. If you're hearing this, you're one of the few still connected to the remnants of humanity. An electromagnetic pulse has shattered our world, silencing power grids, phones, and everything we rely on. Welcome to the EMP apocalypse. The world, as you knew it, is gone. In an instant, we were thrown back into the dark ages. No warning, no chance to prepare. It started with a single unexplainable jolt. A sudden shockwave, a pulse that we couldn't see, but we sure felt. And in that moment, everything changed. The city went quiet. It wasn't the usual city noise. The honking cars, the people shouting, the ringing of phones, the hum of power lines. Number this was a deeper, more chilling silence. The hum of the world, the thing we barely noticed, simply stopped. All the things we had come to depend on for years, our phones, our computers, the lights in our homes, became nothing more than dead weight. The first few minutes, it was confusion, disbelief. Everyone was looking at their phones, their screens, tapping, swiping, trying to figure out what was going on. Some thought it was a glitch, something temporary. After all, we've all seen the power go out before. But this was different. The screen stayed blank, the lights stayed off. Cars that had been humming on the street suddenly coasted to a halt as if they had all simply given up. You might have thought it was a regional issue at first, maybe a power outage. But soon, the truth set in. There was no more traffic on the highways, no more calls to make, no more news to consume. The world was unraveling, piece by piece. Some ran to the stores, expecting to stock up on basics, thinking that the outages would be temporary. Others tried to call their loved ones, only to find the phones useless. That's when panic started spreading. It was subtle at first. Small groups of people gathering around, looking for answers. But it quickly escalated. The realization that this wasn't just a power outage. It was something far worse. And then it hit. The silence became deafening. The city wasn't just quiet. It was empty. Not empty in the usual sense. Number empty in a way that left an unsettling feeling in the pit of your stomach. No voices, no movement. Only the occasional sound of someone trying to start their car. Or maybe the faint footsteps of someone moving through the dark. You couldn't help but feel small in it all, as if the world itself had somehow turned its back on you. A few minutes felt like hours. A few hours, like days. There were no streetlights to guide you, no radio signals to cling to. Nothing. Everything was dead. And just like that, we were thrust into a world where time felt irrelevant. How do you survive in a world where nothing works? That's the question we all need to face now. The world we lived in, the one we thought was permanent, has collapsed. Our technology, our connection to each other, everything we've built, it's all gone. The cities, they're crumbling, becoming ghost towns overnight. The world is silent now, not because the streets are empty, but because the digital web we built our lives on has vanished. And with it, our ability to communicate, to connect, to survive together. I know you're scared. You're not the only one. I'm here too, still trying to make sense of it. All of us are trying to make sense of it. And in the midst of this disaster, we're forced to ask ourselves, what happens now? The pulse hit every part of the globe. And it didn't discriminate. It didn't matter where you were, whether you were in the heart of a bustling city or in a small rural town. The EMP wave didn't care if you had a family, if you had a job, if you had dreams or ambitions. In the blink of an eye, it wiped everything out. And now we're all left in a kind of limbo, struggling to understand what it means to exist in a world that's no longer connected. Think about it. Imagine for a moment, no lights in the night, no digital communication, no access to the news, no simple way of finding out what's happening across town, let alone across the globe. There's a strange kind of loneliness in that kind of silence. The kind of silence where every creak of a door, every movement outside your window feels like an echo from a time you can barely remember. Some of you might be wondering, why did this happen? Was it an attack? Was it a natural event? Was it the end of the world? Or just the beginning of something worse? At this point, we don't have answers. Not all of them. But one thing is certain. We've entered an era where we will have to learn to survive on our own. The systems we took for granted, gone. Electricity, gone. Communication, gone. All those things that kept us feeling safe, secure, and connected, they're now the stuff of memory. We're starting from scratch, as if we've been dropped into a time when we hadn't even figured out how to walk. But there's one thing we can't afford to forget. Even though everything else has failed us, we haven't. The human spirit is still here, still fighting. And while we might be lost in this new world, we're not completely alone. Look around. You might not see many people, but the few you do see, they're survivors just like you. People are beginning to organize, to rebuild. Some of you might have already found others to hold on to. Some of you may still be wandering through the streets, unsure of where to go. But I'm telling you now, whatever you're feeling, you're not alone. We're all in this together. And as long as there's still a spark in one of us, there's still hope for us all. But survival won't be easy. It never is. In the coming days, weeks, maybe months, we will face challenges we'd never imagined. And it will take everything we have, our strength, our resourcefulness, and our will to survive. How do you survive in a world where nothing works? The answer, my friends, lies in each other, in the choices we make next. We have to adapt, evolve, and find a way to move forward. But to do that, we have to remember something fundamental. The world around us may be dark, but that doesn't mean we can't find light. Hold tight, stay strong, and remember, the worst is behind us. Or at least, we hope it is. What comes next, we'll find out together. Now that the dust has settled, well, somewhat, let me take a moment to explain what we've all just lived through. What happened wasn't some natural disaster or an act of God. It was something far more calculated, far more dangerous, an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse. In simple terms, an EMP is a burst of electromagnetic energy that's powerful enough to overwhelm and fry anything that relies on electronic circuits. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, what does that really mean for me? I'll tell you. Every electronic device you've ever used, your phone, your car, the power grid that lights up your home, was vulnerable in a way you never imagined. The science behind an EMP is both fascinating and terrifying. Imagine a massive energy wave sweeping through the air, carrying with it enough force to disrupt all forms of communication, electronics, and anything powered by electricity. At its core, it's an electromagnetic burst that disrupts or destroys the microchips inside your devices, causing them to shut down. That burst can be caused in several ways. The most common, or at least the most talked about, is a nuclear detonation high in the atmosphere. When a nuclear weapon is detonated far above the Earth's surface, it sends out a high energy pulse that spreads across entire continents. No shelter, no hiding from it. This is what's known as a high altitude electromagnetic pulse, or HEMP. It doesn't have the devastating effects of a nuclear bomb hitting the ground, but its impact is far-reaching in another way. Then there's the possibility of solar flares, massive bursts of solar radiation that can trigger a natural EMP-like effect here on Earth. These flares are more unpredictable, but the results are just as devastating. Scientists have been warning about the possibility for years, but it's a risk that, like so many others, we've ignored or underestimated. And of course, there's the most unsettling option, a terrorist attack. A targeted EMP set off deliberately with no regard for the casualties it would cause. We've seen these kinds of threats before. cyber attacks, viral outbreaks, but this one is different. The idea that someone could just disable everything we rely on, it's terrifying to think about. So now you know what an EMP is, but what happened in the minutes, hours, and days after the attack? Let me take you back to those first moments of chaos. It was the middle of the afternoon when the first pulse hit. A bright flash, then a feeling of weightlessness, an odd buzzing sensation. And then nothing. No power, no lights, no phones, no nothing. For a brief second, people thought it was some sort of glitch, maybe a temporary outage, but it wasn't. Around the city, people began to notice the quiet. The traffic lights went dark. Cars came to a sudden halt in the middle of the street, unable to move. For those driving on the highways, it was the worst moment of confusion and panic. Without warning, vehicles stalled everywhere, engines cut out, and the familiar hum of their motors faded to an unsettling silence. It wasn't just the cars. The hospitals went dark almost immediately. Imagine a maternity ward where newborns are hooked up to life support systems, and suddenly everything goes silent. No machines beeping, no monitors flashing. Just the cold, unfeeling silence of an electrical world rendered useless. But the most horrifying part was what was happening in the sky. There's a reason we trust air travel. It's safe, it's reliable, and it has systems in place to prevent disasters. But in that moment, the planes fell. Not all at once, but one by one, pilots suddenly found themselves fighting a battle with systems that no longer worked. I spoke to a survivor, a man who was once a pilot for one of the biggest airlines in the country. He told me about the moment the EMP struck. He was 35,000 feet above the ground, cruising through the sky when everything went black. The navigation systems failed, the communications went down. The plane wasn't just flying blind, it was falling blind. He had to make a decision, and he had to make it fast, with no systems to guide him, no air traffic control to direct him. He had to rely on his instincts, his training. He turned the plane toward the nearest runway, hoping it was still open. He told me, "I've been trained to land a plane in every possible scenario, but nothing prepares you for this. No backup, no options. I just had to trust myself and hope there was enough runway left." He crash landed that plane in a field. The landing was rough, too rough by most standards, but they made it. His story, a miracle. Elsewhere, a family was stuck in traffic on their way to a weekend getaway. They were just an ordinary family. Mom, dad, 2 kids, heading out to a cabin in the woods. They had no idea that this trip would be their last normal moment in what felt like an eternity. The father, a man who had grown up in a world of tech and gadgets, tried to start the car, but it wouldn't budge. He turned the ignition again and again, pressing on the gas as if it were just a minor malfunction. But no, it wasn't a malfunction. The engine was dead. The car wouldn't start. He glanced at his wife, who had the same look of confusion on her face, and then back at his kids in the back seat. "Don't worry, honey," he said. "It's just a little glitch. We'll get it figured out." But as the minutes stretched into hours, the reality set in. It wasn't a glitch. The EMP had wiped out every car's electrical system, every engine, every way to communicate. The wife grabbed her phone, her last lifeline to the outside world, and checked it. No signal, no connection, nothing. That was when the panic started to set in. They were stuck. The world they knew, the one with phones, cars, and power, had disappeared. And then, just like that, it hit. No one knew how long it had been, but the world they knew was gone. For good. The collapse wasn't just in the power grids or the cars. It was the moment when society itself started to crack. The trust in technology, in systems that were supposed to keep us safe and connected, had been shattered. And no one knew how long it would take, or if it would even be possible, to pick up the pieces. How do you survive in a world where nothing works? That's what we all have to figure out now. as the pulse fades and the world around us starts to feel a little less static, the aftermath settles in. It's a strange kind of stillness that falls over the land. For the first time in decades, there's no buzzing, no notifications, no artificial hum of life, just quiet. Phones are dead. The internet, gone. There's no breaking news, no emergency alerts telling us what's happened. Even the most basic communication systems have been wiped out, leaving us with nothing but silence and confusion. The emergency broadcasts, once an ever-present safety net, have vanished as well. Without them, without our usual means of gathering information, people are left stranded in a vast void. And it's not just communication. No, it's much bigger than that. The infrastructure, the systems that support our very existence, are crumbling before our eyes. Without electricity, the world is plunged into darkness. Streetlights flicker and die. Home appliances go cold. Refrigerators, air conditioning, heating, nothing works. Water systems too sputter and fail. The flow of clean water stops, leaving millions without the most basic of necessities. And as if that's not enough, food delivery systems grind to a halt. Grocery stores that once supplied food at the touch of a button now sit empty, their shelves picked clean by panicked citizens. Trucks can't move. No one's getting deliveries. People scramble, desperate to find something to feed their families, while the rest of the world stares in disbelief at the wreckage unfolding in slow motion. I'm hearing reports from cities across the country, New York, Chicago, LA, all of them plunging into darkness. The streets are filled with abandoned cars, engines still idling, lights flickering out one by one. It's like a ghost town. People, dazed and confused, wandering aimlessly, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear. In this darkened world, people are desperate to hold on to something familiar. But with each passing hour, that hope slips further away. Without phones, there's no way to reach anyone. Without power, there's no way to stay warm, to cook, to connect. People are losing everything. And what's worse is they don't even know why it's happening or how to fix it. Let me paint the scene for you. Imagine walking through a city, once a bustling metropolis, now eerily silent. The only sound is the occasional crash as windows break, doors are forced open, and people begin looting. You can't blame them. Not really. They're scared, they're hungry, and they've got no idea what else to do. Their world has crumbled in seconds, and now survival is all that matters. In the streets, chaos is quickly turning into something darker. The looting is not confined to just stores anymore. It's spilling into homes, to places where people once felt safe. People, some of them neighbors, are now enemies, fighting for the same basic resources. There's no law, no order. It's everyone for themselves. The streets are littered with debris, discarded goods, and the frantic footsteps of people searching for anything to survive. On the corner of Fifth Avenue, I saw a store owner trying to protect his shop from a group of looters. His face was twisted with desperation as he stood behind the glass doors, trying to keep them closed with his hands. "This is my livelihood," he shouted, his voice breaking through the silence. But it didn't matter. The looters kept pushing, and the man knew he couldn't win this fight. His world had already crumbled. The shop, like everything else, was going to be swallowed by this new world of chaos. Further down the street, I hear the screech of tires as another car halts, skidding to a stop. A family has just realized that their car is dead, just like all the others. The engine won't start. The gas tank is fine, but the electrical systems are fried. The dashboard is blank. No lights, no radio, nothing. The mother in the front seat is frantically pressing buttons, hoping for some miracle, but it's pointless. It's over. I spoke with a doctor earlier, an emergency room physician, who's now been thrust into the nightmare of treating patients without electricity. No monitors, no x-rays, no way to even sterilize tools. Yet, She's still trying. She's still doing what she can. With shaky hands, she's holding a flashlight between her teeth, stitching a wound closed in the dim light of a makeshift operating room. The adrenaline is keeping her going, but she knows. This is just the beginning. The hours ahead will be even darker, both literally and figuratively. And then there's the sound of sirens in the distance. But wait, are they sirens? Or is it just the wind? No one can really tell anymore. Emergency services are scattered, if not entirely crippled. The radio networks that once helped coordinate rescue efforts are down, and with the collapse of communication, coordinating any kind of relief effort is impossible. Police officers, firefighters, paramedics, everybody is in the same boat. They're in the dark, just like the rest of us. No way to communicate, no way to organize. It's a scene that could have come from the darkest corners of a dystopian movie, but it's not fiction anymore. It's reality. A reality where we have no electricity, no communication, and no real answers. We're learning to adapt, but survival is going to be hard. Maybe impossible for some. As I sit here in the dark, talking to you, I can't help but wonder how many people out there, alone in the chaos, are already giving up. How many people will fade into the silence without anyone knowing? I don't know how much longer this broadcast will last. There's no telling how long we'll have power, if we have it at all. But if you're listening to me, it means you're still holding on. You're still surviving. And I need you to keep holding on just a little longer. This isn't the end of the world, but it's the end of the world as we knew it. And the question now is, how do we rebuild from the ashes? Stay tuned. The struggle for survival has only just begun. As the days stretch on, it becomes clear the world we knew is gone, and we have to find new ways to survive in this desolate, technology-free reality. For most of us, this is the first time we've had to truly live without the devices that have dictated nearly every part of our lives. There's no phone to check, no internet to browse, and suddenly we're all learning how to live in a way we've long forgotten. Survival strategies are simple at first, basic, primal even. Without electricity, we quickly realize we have to get creative. The most urgent need, of course, is water. Without power, the pumps that once filled our taps are useless. So we turn back to nature. Rivers, lakes, and streams become lifelines. But we can't drink it straight from the source. We need to purify it. The methods we once learned in old survival manuals and textbooks, boiling, filtration, chemical tablets, are now essential knowledge. We're becoming our own water treatment plants, improvising in ways we didn't think we'd ever have to. The very tools that felt so outdated a few weeks ago, the simple hand-cranked radios, manual vehicles, old-fashioned cooking stoves, are now our most precious resources. And it's not just water. The fight for food becomes real. Fields and farms, once dependent on modern machinery, are now in a state of disrepair, left to rot without proper care. But some communities have started growing their own crops. People are scavenging for seeds, digging up patches of dirt in whatever space they can find. The age of convenience is over. If you want to eat, you're going to have to grow it yourself. It's a crash course in self-sufficiency, and for some, it's a steep learning curve. But even these basic survival tactics come at a price. The longer the EMP's effects linger, the more we see scarcity take hold. Fuel, food, medicine, all of it becomes harder to find. And what little we do have is being fought over. There are whispers of communities starting to fight each other for resources, people hoarding fuel, trading medicine for food, and desperate families trying to scrape by. And I'm not just talking about strangers. Friends, neighbors, people you once trusted, now seeing each other as threats. For some, the fear of scarcity is palpable. But it's not just the fear of losing resources that's weighing us down. It's the emotional toll of this new world. We all have loved ones, and many of us are separated from them. The blackout has stolen the ability to communicate. And without phones or the internet, we have no way of knowing if they're alive or what's happening to them. There's a particular kind of dread in not knowing. It eats at you, gnaws at the edges of your thoughts, leaving you to imagine the worst. What if they're trapped somewhere? What if they don't even know what happened? There's nothing we can do but wait. And the waiting, the not knowing, it changes people. We try to comfort ourselves with the idea that they're okay, that we'll find them. But there's a part of us that wonders, what if they're not? And as the days pass, the isolation only deepens. There's no social media to scroll through, no news to follow. In this world, even the sound of a human voice can be rare, but as we adapt, as we become more resilient, we start to rebuild what's been lost. In small, hidden communities, people are coming together. They're sharing what they've salvaged, pooling their resources, and protecting what little they have. These small groups form alliances, forming rudimentary defenses against the chaos that's spreading outside their walls. It's a new kind of society, one that's based not on technology, but on face-to-face trust and cooperation. But that doesn't make it easy. The rules are different now. Survival, in its purest sense, is the only thing that matters. Amidst this struggle, there are moments of hope, glimmers of humanity that remind us that we're still alive, still capable of love and connection. But these moments are fragile. A mother, her face streaked with dirt and worry, searching frantically through the wreckage of a shattered city. Her child was taken from her during the chaos of the blackout, and she hasn't seen them since. The streets are a maze of confusion, and the fear in her eyes is unmistakable. She doesn't know if they're safe or if they're out there somewhere, waiting for her. All she has is the hope that she'll find them before it's too late. Then there's a technician, an older man, his hands shaking, working tirelessly to repair an old radio. It's an ancient model, the kind most people have long since discarded. But not him. He knows that if he can get this working, if he can just find a signal, there might still be a way to reach the outside world. Maybe there's a chance someone's out there. Maybe this is the lifeline they've all been waiting for. But time is running out, and the frustration builds with every failed attempt. These are just two stories, in a world full of them. Stories of survival, of loss, and of hope. They're the stories that make us human, that remind us of who we are in the face of unimaginable disaster. And maybe, just maybe, they're the stories that will help us find a way back from this abyss. In the weeks following the pulse, a strange mix of dread and determination has taken over the remnants of society. We're living in the ruins of what once was, but the fight to rebuild has already begun. It's not the frantic race for technology we might have expected. No, the tools we need now are simple, basic, and largely analog. In a world without electricity, without the constant buzz of the modern age, the effort to restore even the simplest systems is monumental. But humanity has always found a way to survive. Across the country, engineers and scientists are forming makeshift teams, driven by a singular goal: to restore power, to rebuild the systems that once connected us all. They know it won't be easy. EMPs aren't just a temporary glitch. They're a cataclysmic reset. The pulse destroyed more than just our power grids. It shattered our entire infrastructure. The delicate network of satellites, communication systems, and even the electrical components inside our cars, all of it down. But in this new world, ingenuity is the only currency that matters. Engineers are pulling out their old textbooks, relying on knowledge that hasn't been used in decades. Old systems that once seemed obsolete are suddenly the key to survival. They're focusing on creating EMP-resistant systems, buildings, power grids, and communications networks that can withstand another pulse if one comes. It's a painstaking process, requiring long hours and a great deal of trial and error. But the hope of success keeps them going. The biggest breakthrough so far has been the adaptation of the very tools we once abandoned. Ham radios, those bulky, clunky devices we thought were relics of the past, have become a lifeline. In the absence of phones, the internet, and even simple landlines, These radios have allowed people to reconnect. One survivor, a former technician, had the foresight to carry a small ham radio with him when the pulse hit. At first, it was nothing but static and interference, but after days of tinkering with the device, he was able to catch a faint signal from a nearby group of survivors. That signal, those simple words of hope, were like a beacon in the darkness. We're still out here. With that, others began to follow suit. People who had once thought of such radios as outdated started dusting off old equipment, working together to build makeshift communication hubs. Slowly but surely, these radio networks began to grow. They were connecting survivors, people who had been isolated, alone, and in the dark. They were learning to communicate in new ways, relying on a technology that had been rendered useless decades ago. But communication is just one piece of the puzzle. People are adapting in other ways too. With the collapse of global trade and supply chains, the world is beginning to rely on local economies. Money, as we knew it, no longer holds value. Instead, people are bartering, exchanging goods and services face to face, farmers are trading food for medicine, and mechanics are swapping repairs for fuel. Communities are forming around local resources. If you've got access to water, you've got something valuable. If you can repair an old generator, you're a hero. A community in a small town started organizing resource fairs where survivors could trade the things they had in abundance: water purification tablets, tools, seeds, anything that could help them survive the next day. These small moments of cooperation, of people working together to rebuild what's been lost, are the threads that are slowly stitching the world back together. The collective effort to survive, to make something out of nothing, is where humanity's true resilience lies. In the midst of all this chaos, there have been a few glimmers of hope. Survivor groups have found safe zones, remote places where nature still provides, and some systems are slowly starting to function again. A few small towns have managed to restore rudimentary power using solar panels or hand-cranked generators. They're far from perfect, but it's a start. In these rare pockets of stability, people are beginning to breathe again, if only for a moment. And then there's the breakthrough, the one thing that could turn the tide. A small group of engineers working on a series of experimental circuits have found a way to restore limited power. They've been able to rewire some old turbines and power up a small portion of a local grid. It's not much, barely enough to light up a few homes, but it's a spark. And in a world as dark as this one, a spark is all it takes to start a fire. But hope is fragile. The world we're rebuilding isn't perfect. It's raw, unrefined, and full of challenges. And as we move forward, we're constantly reminded of how little we truly understand about the EMP attack itself. Was it just the beginning? Is there more to come? For now, we continue. We continue because that's all we can do. We continue because deep down, we know that our survival depends on our ability to adapt and rebuild. The fight isn't over, it's just begun. In the weeks following the EMP attack, the world has been left shaken, not just by the catastrophic consequences of the first strike, but by the chilling reality that we may not yet be out of danger. The darkness of the first days has started to lift. Gradually, people are finding ways to adapt, to rebuild, to reclaim some semblance of normalcy. But there's a cold shadow that has begun to creep across what little peace remains. The looming threat of another EMP attack. And it's not just a vague possibility anymore. Governments, intelligence agencies, and experts from all corners of the world are uncovering increasingly unsettling evidence. It's as if the first strike wasn't an isolated event. It was only the beginning of something much darker. The kind of attack that might not just cripple civilization again, but end it entirely. It began with rumors, whispers exchanged between the broken survivors, vague chatter in abandoned forms, messages intercepted by desperate intelligence networks. But soon enough, these rumors started to gain weight. Governments had been monitoring the situation since the first EMP hit, and now they had hard evidence. Communications from known terrorist organizations, encrypted signals intercepted from the darkest corners of the world, pointing to the very real possibility that another EMP attack is already in the works. But this time, it might be even worse than before. Reports suggest that those behind the first attack might not have been working alone. There are now disturbing patterns emerging, secretive meetings between factions, cryptic warnings sent from sources we can't fully identify. And it isn't just a terrorist organization planning another strike. It's a coordinated effort across multiple groups, some of whom are still lying in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to unleash chaos once again. One government official, a high-ranking member of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, sent out a public warning last week. His voice was gravely serious as he urged survivors, what few are left, to be vigilant. He made it clear that we are not living in the aftermath of a single attack. No, what we're facing is a threat that could destroy everything we've fought to rebuild. The possibility of another EMP strike is imminent. A second, even more devastating attack is already being plotted. This time, with the capability to take down not just the power grids, but the very heart of civilization itself. No one is safe. But there's more. Beyond the human threat, there's something else. Nature has begun to turn against us too. The sun, our life-giving star, has entered a volatile phase. Scientists have been warning us for years about solar flares, potential for massive bursts of radiation that could send another EMP wave across the Earth. And now, just when we thought we couldn't face another disaster, solar activity has started to increase at an alarming rate. The sun's magnetic field is shifting, and researchers are beginning to speculate that we may soon face a natural EMP of unimaginable power. The two threats, human and natural, are converging, and no one knows what will happen next. As humanity clings to the fragile systems we've managed to rebuild, the clock is ticking. The second EMP might not just disable our infrastructure, it could be the final blow, the one that sends us back to a time when survival was all that mattered. Survivor groups, those few who have managed to organize in the wake of the first disaster, are already preparing. Some have begun fortifying their safe zones, reinforcing their borders, stocking up on food and water, and maintaining a careful watch on the sky. If a solar EMP is coming, they know they'll need every advantage they can get to survive. They've learned, the hard way, that nothing in this world is certain anymore. Not even the air we breathe feels safe. One such group is based out of a small rural town in the Midwest. I spoke with Rachel, one of the group's leaders, just a few days ago. She told me how they've been spending every waking hour preparing for the worst. We've had enough time to realize that we can't just rely on hope anymore, she said, her voice crackling with tension. The first EMP was devastating, but it was almost like a wake-up call. We can't just sit back and wait for things to get better. We're fortifying everything, our homes, our food supply, and even the radio systems we use to stay in touch. We're not going to let another EMP blindside us. We're going to be ready. Rachel's group isn't the only one taking precautions. Across the country, there's a growing sense of unease. The survivors who have banded together know all too well what's at stake. They've seen what happens when the lights go out, when communications fail, when trust in the systems we've come to rely on evaporates like smoke. They're not just afraid of the next EMP, they're terrified that humanity may never be able to recover if it happens again. But what about the governments? What are they doing to protect the rest of us? Well, as the threat of another EMP continues to mount, government officials have started to issue warnings. These are not your usual routine alerts. These are the kind of warnings you hear in the midst of a crisis, when those in power know something we don't. They're urging citizens to prepare for another catastrophic event, and the message is clear: don't wait for help. There may be no one left to help you when the next strike hits. A government official, speaking on condition of anonymity, shared some details of the latest intelligence. According to their sources, there are specific plans in place to strike the U.S. power grid, this time with the kind of precision that could render it utterly useless. We're looking at something far more advanced than the first attack, the official said. The last EMP was devastating, yes, but this next one, it could be the final nail in the coffin. As if that weren't bad enough, solar scientists are also raising alarms. Over the past few months, solar flares have been becoming more frequent and intense. While the chances of a natural EMP hitting Earth are still relatively low, the increasing solar activity is adding a new layer of tension. Experts are warning that a major solar flare could have the same effect as a man-made EMP, wiping out electronic systems across the globe and plunging us back into chaos. We're entering a period of heightened solar activity, said Dr. Helen D. Forrest, a leading solar physicist. It's not something we can predict with certainty, but the risk is rising. A massive solar flare could fry our power grids just like an EMP, and we wouldn't have any warning. The worst part is that we have no way to protect ourselves. There's no technology that can shield us from the sun's wrath. With both human-made and natural threats looming, survivors are starting to feel the weight of the world bearing down on them. They've seen how fragile our systems are. They've watched as everything they've taken for granted crumbled. Now, as they brace for what could be the final blow, there's a chilling question in the air. How long can we keep going before it all falls apart for good? It's a question that Rachel and her group are asking every day. We've had enough time to think about what happens next, she told me. We've made it this far, but we can't just sit back and wait for the next EMP to hit. We need to prepare, because if another strike comes, it might be the end of everything. The survivors are ready, or as ready as they can be, but are any of us truly prepared for what comes next? The truth is, no one really knows, as humanity clings to the fragile systems we've managed to rebuild. One question remains: will the next strike finally silence us for good? There's only one thing we do know. The world may never be the same. And whatever happens next, it's up to us to survive. It's been months since the EMP attack. And if there's one thing that's become clear, it's this: the world has irrevocably changed. The machines, the devices, the networks we relied on, they're gone. The world as we knew it has been erased, and in their absence, humanity has been forced to find a new way of existing. In the days immediately following the EMP strike, survival was all that mattered. People were just trying to get by, to keep themselves and their families safe, in a world that seemed to have fallen apart at the seams. But now, as time has passed, something deeper has begun to emerge. A new kind of wisdom, born out of necessity. The survivors have learned to adapt. Slowly, painfully, but with a kind of resilience that we never imagined possible. The dependence on modern technology, the same technology that we once thought of as invincible, is no longer a luxury, but a distant memory. No longer do we reach for our phones to check the time or send a text. The buzz of our devices, the beeping notifications, the comforting hum of the grid, it's all silent. What we once considered normal has become an artifact of the past. And in the silence, we've had no choice but to confront our own vulnerabilities. In a world so hyper-connected, so reliant on technology, we never imagined how fragile we truly were. We had access to almost everything at the touch of a button. Food, energy, information, yet it only took one attack, one single pulse, to erase it all. It's become clear now. We were living on borrowed time. The systems we built to make our lives easier, to connect us faster, to move us further, they weren't as secure as we thought. The convenience we took for granted has now turned into a stark reminder of how vulnerable we had become. In the wake of this catastrophe, humanity has had to learn the hard way. People who had never grown a single tomato before are now farming, learning to use ancient tools they'd long forgotten. Water must be filtered by hand, firewood chopped in the dark. People are teaching their children how to read by candlelight, far from the digital screens that once dominated their lives. Some are even starting to build makeshift radios, turning to technology of the past to communicate. For many, these survival tactics are a bitter pill to swallow, but for others, they've begun to feel like a return to something more human. In the absence of machines and digital distractions, we've had to look to each other for support. Communities have formed. Small, tight-knit groups of survivors who barter for food, trade tools, and protect each other. There's no more room for the isolation that technology once gave us. Now, people rely on one another more than ever before, and it's in these connections that something new has started to grow. A sense of belonging, a sense of purpose that doesn't come from a phone screen, but from the very people standing next to us. But for all the adaptation, the world is still a shadow of what it once was. Survivors are working tirelessly to rebuild, but the wreckage is vast. The power grids, those behemoth lifelines that kept the world humming, are still down. Communications are still sporadic, unreliable. There's a constant sense of waiting, of wondering when the next attack might come, if another EMP might strike again and set everything back to square one. The worry gnaws at the back of our minds, even as we rebuild. The fear of the unknown. And then there's the emotional toll. In the face of this new world, many people are still grieving. They're grieving lost loved ones, the loss of a world that they will never get back, the children who will never know what it was like to swipe through apps or FaceTime their friends, the elderly who can no longer use the conveniences they once relied on. It's a harsh new reality. But there's also a strange comfort in the simplicity of it. For some, there's peace in the quiet, no more digital noise, no more endless notifications. The world, for once, has slowed down. Yet, even with all the devastation, there's a surprising amount of hope. It might be faint, but it's there. Communities have found ways to work together, to support each other, and to keep going. People have learned that survival doesn't depend on technology, but on each other. They've learned that there is strength in community, in bartering, in sharing what little we have. There's a sense of pride in knowing how to fix things with our hands, how to grow food from the soil. As I talk to survivors, as I listen to the stories of those who are adapting, I see something changing. There's a realization that we might have been too reliant on technology in the past. It's not that we should abandon progress. No, it's about understanding the balance. We have to learn from the past, take the lessons of survival and resilience, and rebuild something stronger, something more connected to the earth, to each other. We may not have the power grids. We may not have the digital conveniences we once took for granted. But in this new world, we've found something more powerful. We've found our voice again. In the silence of a world without machines, humanity has been forced to remember who we are, and we've remembered that we're stronger than we thought. But the question remains, will we remember the lessons we've learned? Or are we doomed to repeat the same mistakes? Will we rebuild only to fall into the same trap of over-reliance on technology? Will we allow ourselves to forget how easily it can all be taken away, how fragile the systems we've built really are? Or will we choose to move forward with a more thoughtful, grounded approach to life in this new world? In the silence, the lessons are there for those who will listen. The question is, will we heed them? The future, though uncertain, is now in our hands. It's a future built on what we've learned in the past months: survival, resilience, and community. But as we rebuild, we have to ask ourselves one final question. Will we learn from the past, or will we simply repeat it? As humanity clings to the fragile systems we've managed to rebuild, one question remains. Will the next strike finally silence us for good? Or will we find a way to adapt, to survive, and to move forward in a world that may never be the same? Before I go, let me ask you for something. If this broadcast gave you even a glimmer of hope, if it made you feel a little less alone, then please like and share it. Your support helps us keep going, helps us reach more people who need a little light in their darkness. If you have any suggestions or feedback, drop a comment and let us know. Your voice matters, and we're here to listen. We're bringing you new broadcasts every day. So don't forget to subscribe. Together, we'll keep this spark alive. I'll see you tomorrow with another broadcast. Until then, stay warm, stay safe, and remember, you're not alone.